Well, let me begin by saying welcome, Secretary Albright. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Ben West. I study Latin American Studies and Archaeology.
A já se jmenuji Marketa, jsem mezinárodní student z České republiky. My name is Marketa, I'm an international student from Czech Republic. Welcome.
My name is Noorjahan, I'm a student from Afghanistan and I'm studying sociology here.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Rizwan and I'm a student from Guyana, South America, and I'm studying biochemistry and molecular biology.
What a great group. Glad to be with you. So I'm Madeleine Albright. I was born in Czechoslovakia, and I teach American foreign policy and did a few things in between.
Excellent. I think we have a few questions about American foreign policy.
Okay.
I was sort of noticing in the last perhaps like 10 to 15 years, issues in Latin America of U.S. foreign policy have sort of taken a back seat to other more perhaps pressing world regions. I was curious what you think in the next few years the greatest challenges and opportunities are for the United States in that region.
Well, I have always believed that we needed to have a much more robust policy vis-a-vis Latin America. But I have to tell you, frankly, it's not easy. Partially because if we do too much, then a lot of the countries there say, leave us alone. And if we don't do enough, then they say what you just said, which is, why don't you care? And so I think it's a complicated relationship. But one of the things that we did during the Clinton administration was to talk a lot about the solidarity of the Americas and try to figure out how to have respectful relationships. And when I was secretary, I used to travel around with a map that showed how the governments in Latin America were changing from authoritarian to democratic. And authoritarian were in red, and the democratic ones were in green. And when we were in office, there was only one little red island left. But I do believe that we need to have, I think, just much more involved relationships and ones in which we complement each other. And it's not kind of a feeling that I know a lot of the Latin Americans have that we are telling them what to do. On the contrary, we need to be partners.
Well, my question was considering the current situation in Ukraine, which so you're aware of. And after the fall of Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia was able to peacefully separate into two countries. Do you think that Ukraine should consider a decision that would divide the pro-West and pro-Russia regions, or is Kiev actually able to find a form of government that would keep the country as a one? And what the West should be doing at this specific moment under current circumstances, if the current expansion of sanctions is enough to stop Putin from taking over the eastern Ukraine as a part of his ambition to expand Russian influence in the rest of Europe?
I think what President Putin did is a game changer in terms of the kinds of experiences that the countries in Central and Eastern Europe were having at the end of the Cold War. And I'll never forget this. I was doing a lot of focus work group right in 91, went all over. And I was in Russia doing one where, I'll never forget, this man stood up and he said, we used to be a superpower, and now we're Bangladesh with missiles. And there has been a real identity crisis that the Russians are having, and Putin kind of plugged into that and is acting as if he is bringing back Russia or the czars. One of the proudest moments of my tenure as Secretary of State was when we brought the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland into NATO. And part of it was to make clear that countries that were ready to be members could and should be part of the West, that countries need to be able to make their own choice about where they belong. And the Warsaw Pact fell apart because I think one of the mistakes the United States made was to say we won the Cold War. The bottom line is they lost the Cold War. It was a system that didn't work. And so I could talk about this for a very long time because I feel very strongly about it. But I think that the countries that border Russia have every right to make decisions about where they want to be. And I think it's possible and likely and would be good if the Ukrainians were able to have a Western perspective, be a part of whatever groupings they want to be, but also have a good relationship with Russia. It doesn't mean one is not the opposite contradiction of the other. On your question about splitting, Czechoslovakia was a very special case, I think. And I have to say, when I was growing up, I would ask my parents, was I a Czech or a Slovak? And they said, you're a Czechoslovak. And they were of a generation, the first generation of Czechoslovaks after World War I, and they were very proud of it. So I was I have to say, one of the people that I wish it hadn't split. But what is interesting are the good relationships now between the Czechs and Slovaks, much better than they ever were. And I have to tell you also, when I was doing that survey I was telling you about, we were in Slovakia, probably in Košice or someplace, and we were with a group of people, and we said, would you prefer to be number 1 in ice hockey as Czechoslovakia or number 12 as Slovakia? And they said number 12 as Slovakia. And that there really was a clear sign that ordinary people wanted that. I think that Ukraine is different. It's much more mixed in the eastern area. Not everybody is a Russian or even pro-Russian. There are a lot of Ukrainians that aren't. I think that the solution there is a federal system in which the people in the various regions in Donbass would be able to have a lot of autonomy. Not, however, what Putin wants, which is for them to be able to vote against the foreign policy of what Kiev wants. But I do think that in this day and age, highly centralized states, countries don't work, and that it's important to give autonomy to various regions. And I think that is the solution. So also, I don't think there would be the line physically between the Czechs and the Slovaks with Moravia in the middle, is a little bit different. But one of the stories I often tell, Czechoslovakia was made up basically of Bohemia, Moravia, Slovakia, and Subcarpathian Ruthenia. And one of the things that happened at the end of World War II, President Beneš gave Subcarpathian Ruthenia to Ukraine. And there's a little town there called Uzhgorod, which had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, part of Czechoslovakia, and then Ukraine, and they never moved, And so it is a complicated area, but your specific question, I don't think that it could split as easily as the Velvet Divorce. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I had another question, but your response brought up another question in my mind that's different from my original one. But in regards to Afghanistan, many people recently have been speaking of a federal system that would probably make the relations between the South and the North better, maybe give more power to the Taliban in the regions where they have more public support and not so in other regions. Do you think that same model of a federal government would work there as well?
I think actually yes. From what the people that I've talked to from Afghanistan, and by the way, I know both Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani, and the different groups within Afghanistan itself, I think that there are people who say that Americans don't understand how Afghanistan is put together, and that culturally and ethnically that there are highly differentiated parts. So yes, the question is how a federal system works. And if you look at how constitutions in different federal governments that really work, I think do have a central, they have a capital and a legislative system that allows representations of various more autonomous parts. So it isn't as if you separate it and have no relationship. And my feeling is that yes. What do you think that, or what do you?
I'm highly conflicted about this issue because I also think that much like Ukraine, these areas are very much mixed. In the south, which is highly populated by Pashtun ethnic groups, there are lots of non-Pashtuns. In the north, there are many different ethnic groups. So I don't know how arbitrary these borders of states that we will create will be, and whether or not Afghans themselves will be satisfied with those borders that will be created.
Well, one of the things, if you, the United States is different from every country, and even though we have a federal system, it's a different kind of thing. But I do think that one of the things that people forget about democratic governments is majority rule and minority rights. And I think that one can delineate certain borders if, in fact, there are minority rights within them. But it's difficult. And I think when you think about federal countries that work, there are few of them. And it does require, one of the questions is what happens to the taxes? That's what a lot of this is about. If you collect federal taxes, do they go back to the other regions. And in Ukraine, what has been the problem, in addition to the history of how Ukraine was put together, was that the taxes have not gone back to the eastern part. I think in Afghanistan it's a different issue, and I also think that in Afghanistan there are more different ethnic groups, and the relationship between the North and the South and the Taliban has been more complicated. But it doesn't pass kind of human brain power to try to figure out systems that allow some integration and at the same time allow various regions to have more control over their taxation systems and their rights, if in fact it doesn't undercut the rights of the minorities that live there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough balance
It
to
is,
keep.
yeah.
I actually had a question about like your pins. Like I know like in the past like you've given like great significance to the pins you choose to wear at special occasions. And you even wrote a book about like the various pins
Yeah.
you've used to kind of express yourself both personally and diplomatically. So I was wondering if like you like have any special pin for tomorrow, and if that has any special meaning.
Well, the pin I'm wearing today has special meaning because it's your red devil.
Yes.
And I'm not going to wear a pin tomorrow because I don't think it looks right on my academic robes. But I do think it's fun. I've had a lot of fun with the pins, and the way it started, I have to tell you, is I clearly like jewelry. But what happened was that when I was ambassador to the United Nations, was right after the Gulf War, and the ceasefire had been translated into a series of sanctions resolutions that had to be kept on. I was an instructed ambassador, and my instructions were to make sure the sanctions stayed on. And so every day I said something terrible about Saddam Hussein, which he deserved. He had invaded Kuwait. So after a while, a poem appeared in the papers in Baghdad, comparing me to many things, but among them an unparalleled serpent. So I had a snake pin, and I wore it whenever we talked about Iraq. And then when I went out, you've seen pictures of when the ambassadors go out and talk to the press. So the camera zeroed in and said, "So why are you wearing that snake pin?" And I said, "Because Saddam Hussein compared me to an unparalleled serpent." And I thought, well, this is fun. So I went out and I bought some costume jewelry to reflect whatever we were going to do on any given day. So when the other ambassadors said, "What are we going to do today?" I would say, "Read my pins." And that's how it all started.
Yeah, that's the title of your book, right?
Read My Pins,
Read My
right.
Pins.
And they all have foreign policy stories.
Okay.
And so it allows me, when it's a show and it travels around, and I always try to meet with students, high school students in these, and when people ask me questions, so for instance, how did it work in foreign policy? So I have one pin that is actually an arrow, but it looks like a missile. And when I was negotiating the anti-ballistic missile treaty with the Russians, Foreign Minister Ivanov leaned over and he said, "Is that one of your missile interceptors?" And I said, "Yes." And we make them very small, and you need to negotiate. Or when the Russians actually bugged the State Department, there was a room not far away from my office, and we found this man sitting outside listening. And we did what you do diplomatically as démarche, is to tell the people in Moscow this was unacceptable. But the next time I met the Russians, I had this huge bug, and they knew exactly what I was doing. Yeah, so.
Oh wow.
So if no one minds, can I ask my other question?
Yeah.
You have been an icon for American women and women around the world. Your accomplishments are definitely testimony to how, not just how incredible you are, but the potential of women if they're given the chance to really flourish and reach their potential. You're definitely, without debate, a very empowered woman who has made amazing accomplishments and really impacted the way we see the world in a tremendous way. How do you define women's empowerment? How do you distinguish an empowered woman and her qualities from one who might not be?
Well, let me say, when I became secretary, I decided to make women's issues central to American foreign policy, not just because I'm a feminist, but because we know that when societies empower women politically and economically, they're more stable.
Absolutely.
And you really see a difference. And also because in every country, women are at least half the population. So if women are not part of the system, it really robs the system of resources, if I can put it that way. And what I do think happens is that it is very important to have women politically empowered, which means that they should be elected to various positions. As a matter of fact, I just had an interesting discussion with somebody about Afghanistan, where there was going to be, actually yesterday with Lakhdar Brahimi, who had been the envoy there, who said that one of the deals they were going to make was that every province was going to say that they would have 2 women elected to the loyal jirga. And some of the provinces are so small, they made an agreement that by average there would be 2 women, but a real recognition that having women elected to office makes a difference in terms of the way decisions are made and what some of the priorities are. Economically empowering women, I think, makes clear that it isn't that women don't have jobs in developing countries, it's just that they work harder and get no pay, which is not untrue in other developed countries. But the bottom line is I think it does make women part of the system and improves the system. I do think, obviously, societies are composed of men and women, and so it's very important to have that kind of cooperation. But there is no question that the countries where women are in office or are able to own businesses or have an education, I think things change for the better. But it is very difficult. There is no question about it, and it never finishes. And part of the issue is trying to persuade men that actually societies are better off when men and women cooperate. I am chairman of the board of an organization called the National Democratic Institute, and one of the things that we do is support women candidates all over the world, basically giving them kind of the nuts and bolts of how you campaign, what you do when you do get into office. And I think it makes a difference. So, but it's not simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So what is next? Can I ask that question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to go back to grad school.
Yeah.
However, I felt that at this moment would be a wiser choice for me to really get more experience. I'm international business and management major, and what I'm interested is specifically business strategy in exports, imports, where I could take advantage of my international background and kind of combine it with my business background. So I'm still looking. I'm very aware of how global Dickinson is, and that I have a lot of options as where to go, if say the United States or going to another country. So I'm really excited about that.
Great, but not go back to the Jakubcova?
Not at the moment, because I feel that I can still gain a lot of experience. I've been to Argentina for a semester, and languages are my passion, and I would like to learn even more than that.
Good for you. Great.
Unlike Marketa, I'll be starting grad school this fall.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in research, because I've been doing research at Dickinson. And so I'll be starting a PhD program in cancer biology this fall. So I'll be jumping right into it. And
Very good. Excellent.
I'm going to AU for American University for journalism for a year, and then I'm going home, hopefully to work with a media organization at home. My goal is my end goal someday, when I have the chance, is to create a women's news network where women will be able to use media for empowerment in the rural areas, because I feel that there's very little representation of rural Afghan women in the general international and national news media.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I studied abroad in Brazil for a year, and I thought, geez, it would be really cool to return there. So I'm going to be teaching English starting next February on the Department of State Fulbright program.
And do you know where in Brazil yet?
Not
No,
yet.
they
I'm
haven't
really
told you.
excited to find out.
So just to tell you my travel plans in the next few days, I'm going to Poland to give a speech, then I'm going to Ukraine to do the elections, and then I'm going to Brazil. Everybody does that travel.
Are you going to the World Cup later in
No,
the summer?
but
This is just in the next few
no,
days?
but my company is working with McKinsey. We're putting on a big conference in Rio on infrastructure, and I think infrastructure is I have now included many things in infrastructure, and I say it's not just cement, but basically how communities organize themselves. What are the schools like in a particular community, and what are some of the environmental issues and political issues and things. So we had a conference in Istanbul a year ago, and now we're going to go to Rio and do that. But,
That sounds very interesting.
yeah, so good things.
Yes.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations to all of you.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.